Let's go ahead and rate the current state of Big Ten rivalries based on this scale from on simmer to fever pitch. We'll start with on simmer, where the rivalry game has either been too lopsided or just isn't a real rivalry game. Like Rutgers versus Maryland, they just tried to force when those two teams joined the Big Ten. And then Iowa and Michigan have been dominating that game versus Minnesota, and then Minnesota's been dominating versus Nebraska. The next tier is needs a spark. These are some rivalry games that either haven't been played enough to be considered truly historic and truly top-tier rivalries, and then other ones that have been relatively one-sided recently. Like Oregon has dominated the recent history versus USC, Michigan has been in control against Michigan State, and then for Penn State, they just haven't been in the Big Ten long enough to establish a crazy storied history versus some of these teams. They're still high-stakes games like their games versus Ohio State and Michigan usually, but just not a traditional rivalry. The next tier is heated rivalries. These rivalries are all very historic, have been played for a very long time, and have had some nice back and forth, with Nebraska losing to Iowa by one score like seemingly the last 10 years. Indiana has recently reignited a fire against Northwestern, Illinois, and Michigan State with their recent found success, and then Purdue-Illinois is a nice underrated Big Ten rivalry as well that produced a classic this last season. There's two rivalries that have reached a boiling point. Wisconsin v. Iowa has had some pretty awesome results recently and a little bit of a back and forth there. And then Purdue versus Indiana I've always thought has been a very underrated rivalry, but right now these two fan bases hate each other, and after a Purdue renaissance, now it feels like the Indiana renaissance is happening and these programs are going right at each other. Finally, at the top tier, we have fever pitch, rivalries that are at maximum relevance and maximum hatred for each other. Michigan versus Ohio State requires no further explanation. Washington versus Oregon has developed really nicely, with the Huskies stealing a couple of games recently versus the Ducks. Wisconsin-Minnesota is one of the most underrated rivalries in all of college football, and it's one where it truly makes or breaks both of those teams' seasons. And then UCLA versus USC, always high stakes regardless of what the records of those two teams are, and it just is a great game to watch.